Karin requires no introduction on this podcast. She is a frequent visitor and is always welcome. Her powerful voice brings great authority to her enlightening views and her laser-guided perspectives. She sees through the chaff and hits on points often lost to either obscurity or the passage of time. In discussing the January 6th attack on the Capitol, we traverse a very circuitous path. Owing to Karin's long-time membership of and affiliation to PEN, we initially considered the threats to freedom of expression and freedom of the press the event underpinned. It should never be separated from the reign of Trump, but be forever associated with his style of leadership. To lead the people is not always to serve the people. In the face of limitless power, we have too often observed severely limited opposition, and who else remains to pick up the slack, if not the well-intentioned press and whistleblowers? In an age where we are finally seeing that human rights must also be extended to non-humans, are we to allow the political right to stampede the entire charter with their cunning twisting of words and simple slogans? Karin witnessed many oppressive ideals exchanged while in the US, and those ideals were never dissolved, merely dormant. In this episode, we look at how they have manifested themselves today. Before we wear you out, Karin, let's jump into the topic of the day. So, first of all, it's great to hear your voice again. As I said, it's been quite a few weeks. I've not necessarily kept track of time, but I do believe we haven't had a session in about 5 weeks now. Is that possible?
The 4th of October, I think we had one, didn't we?
Really? Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Yeah. No. It's very possible. It feels like it's been 5 weeks.
It's been a long time. Yes.
It's definitely been a long time. Yeah. And so it's wonderful to be able to speak with you again.
Together again. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a bit like having a sort of duet, but with only one person singing. It just doesn't really work. So it's good to have add your voice to the team.
I hope I have something to say. Yes.
Okay, so we're going to jump in today with a little bit of political analysis of what happened on January the 6th in Washington. So the attack, as it were, on the Capitol. And I thought we'd sort of jump through it with a certain number of questions, and just to give these questions, brief in some ways, maybe in some cases a bit more detailed. But for a start, for you, because of your association or long association with PEN, for you, this concept of freedom of the press and freedom of expression, these are particularly valuable principles within a democracy. You remember the Trump days as well as I do. How damaging do you think Trump's stance was with regards to certain elements of the media to this concept of freedom of the press?
He had his side of the press, which obeyed him to a T. And he had the opposite kind of press who didn't listen to him. They only observed and analyzed what he was doing. I think in the long run, he did no more damage than had been done in the last 20, 30 years when the Republicans had in certain times, at certain times, had gone against freedom of expression. And I remember particularly New York Penn. We have two huge Penn centers in America, and they're fantastic. They went against Bush when he called for the war against terror, because with the Patriot Act, a lot of privileges had been cancelled, and those were not privileges, those were fundamental rights to freedom of expression. And it was the Penn centers who called the government to task, and they even initiated a lawsuit against the government because of the Patriot Act. And I thought that was more than I would have expected in England or in Germany.
How, to what extent? Because I haven't heard of this action. So, is that because of my own ignorance of these specific events, or were they unsuccessful in their claim?
Those were events that didn't make the press here. They hardly made the press in the English-speaking media. They did make the rounds in America, of course, but the Patriot Act stayed on for quite a while, and the Penn centers went against it over and over and over again. And we in International Penn, of course, knew about it. And it was one thing that I was still Writers in Prison chair at the time. I was very proud of our friends in America, and they have always really guarded the human rights and the right to freedom of expression in their own country, which sometimes takes courage, but it also takes stamina, and that's what they had, and they still have. The information, of course, is staying within Penn circles, and it doesn't make the international press. Hardly ever.
Where do you stand, for example, on whistleblowers? Because Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, these are individuals who really did bring to light the depths of institutions like the Patriots Act, but also essentially all of these hidden government programs.
Absolutely.
Do you think these should also be covered by freedom
they are
of the
being
press?
Covered by Penn. They are being covered by International Penn, and the thing is that each Penn center is autonomous. Those centers who do not want to join into in the fight for the whistleblowers don't have to. It's not a do or don't, or you have to leave Penn. No, they are absolutely free to do or not do. And it was quite a number of Penn centers who joined in calling for release of all of those who were in trouble. And there were quite a number, we all know, during the last 10, 20 years. And they were all kind of our charges. And we fought for their freedom and for their right to do what they did in almost throughout Penn. Of course, not in some smaller Penn centers, but there was a movement to free them. But of course, that again, it does not hit the press, because the press knows that Penn is vocal. The press of the individual countries may make reference to the stance of Penn centers, but there is no international recognition of PEN as a whole. You see, it's 150 PEN centers, and the recognition is in their own country or not, by the press, depending on where the press stands. And but international PEN as a whole only gets into the news when there are humanitarian prizes, when there are actions during PEN congresses, and PEN congresses come once a year. And since then, the business of international PEN is so multifaceted, because we always have something like 200 active cases of people we are standing up for, that it's very hard to pinpoint where there is news of what we're doing.
And
but the support has always been there.
And with regards to, for example, Julian Assange, who I believe this week he's going to, or the High Court is going to listen to his case and will make a decision as to whether or not he will be sent to the US to face trial there on extradition charges. Has Julian Assange ever been a character of interest for PEN? Or
absolutely, yes. I must confess that during the last couple of weeks and even beyond, I have not followed the international website where these things are discussed and brought to light, what international PEN is doing, where the efforts are positive, where they have a positive response, and so on and so forth. There I have to beg my ignorance. I know that Assange and everyone who has been whistleblowing has become known, has been in the books of international PEN and PEN centers, and has been given the attention and the drive and the protests that to the governments, to the embassies, to the press. The press sometimes doesn't pick it up, but it's always there. The only thing is, PEN is a small unit. International PEN as such has maybe 15, 16, 17,000 members. Look at what the membership of Amnesty International is, in contrast. So we are being neglected by the press sometimes, or in many instances. But there's always the watchful eye on these cases, and the protests go, every case we pick up, the protests go to the embassies, to the international institutions, to the governments, and of course to the press. And if the press picks it up, we're happy. If they don't, we have nothing we can do about it.
Would you say that you are particularly proud then of the fact that Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov received the Nobel Peace Prize for their work to safeguarding freedom of expression this year?
Absolutely. The freedom of expression for journalists, for writers, for all of us is so important that any prize that calls attention to the fact that we need freedom of speech and freedom of expression is a godsend. In Germany, the Freedom Prize of the book fair has just been given to Tsitsi Zambarenga, whom I met 30 years ago for the first time. I haven't met her more than twice, maybe, but I've followed what she has been doing, and that again, there again, at least in Germany, her life and what she is trying to do has become a part of the press, of the interest of the press, and of everybody around here. I haven't followed whether there is some international acclaim for her or notification that she has gotten this prize. But this, the prize of the book fair has been given to Orhan Pamuk. It has been given to Harold Pinter, I think.
Okay.
And quite a number of other people who later got the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that is a particular prize for people, not for their literature, but for their involvement in freedom of the press. So I think that's a very important signal, and it should be taken up internationally as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely with you on all of those bases, because it seems to be that there's like a bit of political pushback from these kinds of organizations, simply highlighting the fact that we have descended so much into polarized and extremely volatile reporting, that there is a need for people to be able to attach themselves to the established reporting, the responsible reporting, and to try to reintroduce that element of respect for these established reporters, in the hope of protecting what they do. The way that things are going is just simply not, it's not conceivable that people would want to become journalists if this is how they're going to be treated. Exactly.
Journalism has become one of the most dangerous professions in the world. The writers writing, even if they write against the government or some people have been thrown into prison for one line in a poem, which the dictators didn't like. When Ken was founded, they concentrated only on writers because they didn't have a voice outside with the press and so on and so forth, not to the point that was needed. And the institutions like the Committee to Protect Journalists and so on and so forth, there are quite a number that have really developed in the last 30 years. So there are now quite a number of organizations that protect the right of journalists. The problem is that the attacks against journalists are not necessarily coming from governments, but from criminal sources. Look at Mexico, look at South America, where you have mafioso gangs who kill journalists, and the governments do not protect them, sometimes cannot protect them to the point where they should be protected. And so the world has changed. When it all started, it was a fight against governments who were silencing journalists and writers. Today, it's in part only governments and official authorities. It's the crooks, it's the mafiosi, it's the drug cartels, the landowner cartels in Brazil, and so on. So they're all in this fight against journalism, because it's the journalists who call them to task.
Well, I mean, just on a political note, today we're going to move around a little bit, and perhaps a bit more quickly than normal, because I don't want to keep you talking more than is more than you feel comfortable doing. But why is it that opposition parties have lost that ability to oppose?
You don't have, in politics, you don't have the black and white only anymore. You don't have the two sides only in government. You do have not the two big parties that fight each other, that one is governing, the other one is in the opposition. You have a scattering of parties, and that prevents that you have an opposition that's strong enough to go against what is going wrong. Because you have, if I look at the German end of it, okay, you have now 3 parties that tried to get into the government together, and you have an opposition of, I don't know, there's so many small parties that join in the cacophony of pros and cons that you cannot call the 2 parties, the 2 major parties that are in opposition, the opposition. The opposition is much, much wider, and that makes it very difficult.
Well, I mean, in the previous government, obviously you had the AfD was the largest opposition party, and so
yes.
They were in charge of I think the finance committee for the Bundestag and so on. So now it would appear that the CDU would perhaps take over that role if the traffic light coalition does actually materialize. But I mean, countries, Karin, like the UK, where you've got Labour, which is one of the traditional parties, they can't mount a particularly good opposition either. And yeah, that's quite dispiriting, isn't it?
It is. It hurts. But then you have the interests, the financial, the economic, the philosophical interests in England also split into many parts. It's not just 2 parts. It's not just Labour and the Conservatives, as it was with just a minor role for the Liberals. But you have interest groups wherever you look, and they assign themselves to some parties and then they withdraw and go to another one. You do have that in England as well. Look at the Brexit catastrophe.
Yeah. I mean, this has been a bit of a concern of mine as well, in the sense that there are a number of powerful political groups with similar ideologies, and they attach themselves to as many parties as they can essentially afford, because that way, whoever is elected, their interests are represented.
Absolutely.
And so the less parties there are, the easier it is for them to dominate the political landscape or the economic landscape, depending on what their agenda is. But yeah, okay. I mean, this does tie in a little bit with the overall argument that we want to kind of develop with regards to Trump as well, because Trumpism is based upon his approach to politics. So his populist methodology to try to mobilize people who over the last 30 years or 40 years have considered themselves excluded from politics because it was the sort of the neoliberal domain, that they were not allowed to pursue their slightly more right-wing opinions and ideologies.
If that were the only reason why he has such a power base, that could be probably easily been taken care of. But he has a power base in the Republican Party. A number of Republicans have voiced their concern about Trump, and they got trampled on by him and by his followers. So there's an atmosphere of fear in the Republican Party, and then we have to remember the Republican Party as it changed after the Civil War was a party of people who didn't want any government, less government wherever, no dependency on Washington. I remember when I was in Texas, it really bothered me because wherever I went, the Texans said we didn't want a democracy when we rebelled against the English king. We wanted a republic, and we want a republic now. We don't want Washington. We make our own laws, and we abide by our own laws, and we have our own people, and we have our own basically interests. And that is why Trump has been able to get the bulk of the Republican Party in his grip, because he always said Washington is bad, we have to get rid of it, and we have to take over. And this takeover was the culmination of this takeover was the 6th of January. That was not the Republican Party, but it was those who were aggressive and had believed everything Trump had said and everything that Republicans had said as well, whereas the Republicans were caught inside the Capitol and were fearing for their lives. Their leader was outside with the mob to storm the Capitol and get at them, and there was a outcry. We have to kill him or her or Pelosi, and we have to find our vice president who has not disrupted the takeover of power or the giving over of power from Trump to Biden. That was the culmination of we don't Washington. We want to. We are the ones who say what is going to happen, and our interests are not the interests of Washington and the politics and the politicians.
So essentially this pursuit of decentralization and maximized within the federal republic, that is the USA. I mean, we've also seen elements of this in Texas after Biden's takeover, when we look at how Texas has approached the right of women to have abortions. So
exactly,
they've gone.
That's why.
Sorry.
No, this is why I mentioned my experience in Texas, where I saw this 40 years ago. What was happening? You know, what could have happened, or if the fear that if those elements would get into power or were bundled into a movable force, and they were bundled into a movable force by Trump. And Trump used them, which I don't think they have realized so far. Some people in the Republican Party have understood what is going on, but the fear that is raging in the party is terrible.
Well, I mean, he did receive the highest number of votes of any Republican presidential candidate in the history of the US. So, I mean, there is quite clearly a huge Republican support for him, or at least his beliefs.
The Republican Party that is operational right now is fully in the grip of Trump. They are afraid of him because his base is violent, as they have seen at the Capitol. And they don't dare go against it. It would have to be a national movement of Republicans to counteract that. And there's no national movement because they don't believe in the national organizations.
It's almost like the opposite of communism, isn't it? Where this sort of social revolution of the masses, and they don't believe in it. It's a class struggle as opposed to a struggle of nations, as it were.
It's exactly the opposite of communism, and everybody who has any kind of social conscience or social program is immediately called a communist.
Mm.
We had this when Eisenhower became president. He was called a communist.
Senator McCarthy was this in the days of McCarthyism, 1950s, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was standing there with my friends, and we were talking, and we were listening to the radio or to television, and when I first heard that the cry, "This is communism," Eisenhower is a communist, I didn't know where I was. And you had the same thing with Obama. He was called a communist by some elements. He was everybody who had FDR anyway. Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Depression, because he really brought social programs into life that helped America to survive financially and economically. And of course, he was called a communist by those who didn't want that kind of practice or that kind of government. And you still have this, and I'm distraught that it has muted so many people, and that the courage, I'm using again the example of the Republican Party, has dwindled.
Mm.
It really has dwindled.
It's interesting in some ways because it also reminds me of the 1934 fascist coup attempt. So that when sort of powerful parties within the US economy, as it were, they tried to bring an army of veterans to basically invade Washington.
Right.
And it was only prevented by General or Colonel, I think, Smedley Butler, because he went to the president with this, and eventually they were prevented from amassing the army because Smedley Butler was supposed to lead them. And it seems to me that Trump tried to essentially succeed where those fascists in 1934 had failed.
Mm-hmm. Well, he used them. He used the fascists that were still existent, of course, everywhere in the rural areas. They were existing in the Middle Belt, in the center of the United States. There were not just those who were influenced by German Nazism, but the movement was basically everywhere to some degree, and it never died, and it could be reformed by somebody like Trump. I can't see why, but he was, to them, was believable.
I mean, do you think how much of this was kind of prepared from the early days? You know, so this, because he came up with terms like fake news, alternative news, as it were, pretty early in his presidency. Do you think he was, the whole time, he was kind of setting up this siege mentality, dare I say it, Alamo mentality? It's us, we are fighting for our republic, and the press are on the side of Generalissimo Santana. Was he trying to create this kind of patriotic fervor, which would essentially lead him to a second term, and who knows, maybe even a change to the constitution and beyond?
Well, there talks about another term in 3 years.
Mm.
And even in the liberal press, they're using kind of the threat image of another 4 years of Trump. So there is a fear. He kind of spread the fear around, not just within the Republican Party, but within society, that he might come back. No, he is somebody who is insecure, who knows his empire stands on feet that may crumble right away. So he needed some kind of power base, because he is somebody who wants power. He wants money and he wants power. And through power, you can get money, which is what you saw in the first years of his presidency, that he and his family were cutting deals with the Chinese, with the Arabs, with the Saudis, for their own benefit. So he used the power he had at the time and used that for economic advantage, which is something that his followers don't see and don't believe. And to them, he is the big man who was able to amass that amount of money and assets that he is pretending to have. And he's pretending to have it. Well, right now it's because of the 6th of January, they're after him to show, because he initiated it, that he instigated it. And right now he's trying very, very hard to avoid having to come to the committee, the Congress committee, and discuss the 6th and his role in the 6th of January. He is not just claiming executive privilege, but he's also claiming, or he's fighting in the courts against the release of the papers on the 6th of January. So he's saying, I have the right to not have these things released because I have executive privilege. And in his wake, we have Bannon, who a day before the 6th of January, on the 5th, stood in front of the cameras and said, "You just be sure, tomorrow there's something's going to happen," which shows that he knew about it, and he probably was one of the instigators, along with Trump, of these riots. And he's trying to get away with murder, so to speak, and not appear before the Congress committee, by also claiming executive privilege, which is twice as ludicrous, because first of all, Trump was no longer the executive at the time, and Bannon had not been a member of the government or an advisor to the government a long time before that, because he and Trump had fallen out. So you have, first of all, now the possibility of Bannon saying, "I won't talk about it," and then he's in contempt of Congress. and he can be thrown into prison right away. And if the next step then, I think, is going to be an attempt to get Trump to maneuver himself into contempt of Congress. I think that's behind some of the goings on right now.
Yeah, I mean, looking just a little bit at some of the events surrounding the January 6th attack on the Capitol. I mean, lots of prominent politicians and people involved in the sort of support groups for Trump really coming out with insightful speech, the kind of comments which are likely to rouse a mob. There's no other way of looking at it. Speeches that include terms such as kicking ass or will you fight for America? I mean, I'm going to go into some of the events in chronological order later on, but it really is worrying, isn't it? And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, doesn't this kind of make the people of, in the first instance, the US doubt the legitimacy of their own democracy if an elected official, the highest elected official, can essentially try to lead that kind of action? And what does that say to other democracies around the world who look to the US, if indeed these democracies still do that after what Trump did, who look to the US as the leading light of democratic power?
Right.
Doesn't this erode that?
What eroded in the first place, or what Trump tried to erode, was the institutions of government. The next step was to erode the laws of the American people. The third one was to erode the law of the Constitution. In that sense, he was double and triply endangering democracy. He didn't get to a second term of office, luckily. So one can say right now that the opposition to what Trump was trying to do was strong enough to ward him off. But he is still at it. He is out of German radio and television mostly. He is not out of much of the American media. The CNN very rarely talks about him. Fox News has also changed in a way. He's out of Twitter and Facebook and so on and so forth. He's making his own network now. He's building it up. Whether it brings what he wants, I don't know. I hope not. The whole thing is so dangerous. It endangers, as you said, the democracy in America more than it had been endangered in the last. It always has been in danger to some degree. Think of the Civil War. That was endangering democracy already. The Constitution of America is on the surface democratic. Everybody has the same rights. And then on the side is everybody who is black does not have the same rights. Only 3/5 of human beings, so to speak. So even then it wasn't democratic. And these things have been given from one generation to the next. And there is, luckily, a measure of America that is against the erosion of democracy, even if it means that they have to change the Constitution and the laws to protect what they believe in, meaning equal rights for all. And so you have really a divided country more than it ever was. It started at the beginning. It culminated in the Civil War, and it never quite gelled into one country, because for a long time the South was clinging to the old ways. We are the best, we are the whites. And the northern or northwestern cities were more liberal, and the fights between the conservatives and the liberals have been with America all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot of the issues which I kind of wanted to cover as well, but I'm mindful also of us not going too long, but I do really want to make a note of some of the topics that you brought up, because I'd like to talk about the Constitution on another occasion, perhaps from a comparative perspective, looking at the German system and the British system as well, and kind of comparing the three systems in one go, as it were, if that's even possible to achieve within our time constraints. But just one more question, perhaps a silly one, but then again, that's okay. The Proud Boys essentially were the ones who attacked the Capitol, or at least they were one of the main groups involved in the attack on the Capitol.
Right.
If they had been Black Lives Matter supporters or demonstrators, people have often commented that the police would have been there armed en masse, and it would have been shoot first and ask questions later.
Yes.
My question is, if, however, there'd been women's rights or gender equality demonstrators, do you think they would have been allowed the freedom that these so-called Proud Boys were given?
No.
Or do you think there'd have been...
Absolutely not.
No? Okay.
No, absolutely not. And I don't know what happened to the state police and to the Washington police, that the state police only responded much too late. I didn't research what the reasons are said to be right now at this point. I don't think that they have come to a final conclusion yet. But it was a botched defense of democracy there too.
Mm. I mean, I'm going to read through later on in the podcast, at the end of when we wrap up our little chat, the chronology of events for the days coming up to January the 6th, and also focusing quite a bit on the events of January the 6th and times and perhaps those parts which were mostly influential for what occurred at the time. So maybe this will give a little bit of background to that which we're talking about. But okay, so you are essentially of the opinion that had there been any kind of liberal movement, they would have been faced with far greater, shall we say, firepower than what we actually saw.
I'm sure, because that was still in the wake of Trump. If it had happened 2 months later under another president, I think then, like under Biden, I think there would have been a stronger force against the Proud Boys. It was the right time. For them, it was the right time to do it because that's the only time they would have gotten that far, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right.
I don't think that. I mean, Washington was absolutely against Trump. New York was against Trump. All the police power of these two cities alone would have crushed the Proud Boys. And if you think how few they were, I mean, that was not a big movement. They had in the background, in the farm countries and in the boondocks, they had supporters, but they didn't have supporters, supporters who lived and worked in Washington or in that particular context.
Mm. Yeah, a friend of mine who's from Washington, he says that if you see a guy, or at the time of the pandemic when it was in lockdown, if you saw a person not wearing a mask, they were Republicans. So, I mean, it's quite clear, apparently, that you can sort of pick out the people who are Republican and who are Democrat, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Karin, you are more energetic than you allow yourself to be credited for. So it's like I have to sort of hit the brakes. Otherwise, we could go on analyzing this all day. I'm pretty sure I can say safely that I was in need of your particular brand of political analysis. It had been far too long, so I'm extremely grateful for your return and your presence and your the refreshing manner in which you analyze these sometimes complex social and political events.
Well, it is in many ways not a researched analysis. It's a personal analysis from what I experienced throughout my stay in the States, which was 60-61, and from 66 through 77. And of course, by having lived there, I kept my eye on what was going on in America, and through my friends got a lot of information. So in that sense, yes, I kept up with the developments in America. And unfortunately, already during the Reagan years, some of my friends called and said, we want to emigrate, but where do we emigrate to? Mm. Because, throughout the world, the Americans weren't the most favored immigrants in any country. Mm. And my friends knew that. I mean, they were absolutely in tune with democracy and with what we think of as worth living for. Mm. Humanism, freedom of speech, the right to life, which in some cases is also being eroded in the States.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? It's funny because, as you say, I think perhaps Democrats travel a bit easier around the world in some cases now. So, I mean, whenever I bump into somebody from the US, I kind of stick in a cheeky question, which way did you vote? As in, I'm not going to be in any way judgmental of them, but I think generally speaking, it's easier for Democrats when they come abroad to say that no, I didn't vote for Trump. So it's interesting.
But this was already with Reagan.
Yeah.
This has also a tradition.
Yeah. Maybe we can go into some of these. How would you say, the mythology, as it were, of some past presidents? Because I've often heard it said that this president was so bad, the worst president ever, but in comparison to that one or that one, and I think it's very easy to forget. Actually, if you go back to those times, they weren't particularly popular either. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. I think maybe we can look at a couple of the presidents while you were in the States, and that would also make for enlightening perspectives. Karin, thank you very much.
Thank you, and yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing your synopsis now.
Oh, no pressure then. Okay. All the best to you, Karin. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
In The Usual Suspects, it was said the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. There are in existence powerful organizations, of course there are, that try to bend political institutions to their will in an open capacity, and in its most positive form we could consider these to be NGOs that try to work charitably for the improvement of certain elements within societies, within certain countries, and so on. Slightly perhaps lesser positively portrayed category would be lobby groups, which naturally represent economic interests for their clients. They use perfectly legal means, I have to state, of trying to gain influence by supporting politicians, either financially or by providing them with networking facilities, perhaps even making them future promises with regards to career development once they have come out of politics. I don't know exactly what it is that they do because I'm not involved in these areas. So therefore I could be completely wrong. However, from what I've read, this appears to be the case. There are, of course, other groups. We don't know about these groups in any particular detail. Sometimes their power is extremely exaggerated. This is where people tend to scream foul and say conspiracy theorist. There are a great many conspiracy theories out there. Some of them are absolute bollocks, and some of them are pretty much on point. The proof has to indicate the path. There is also an element of trust involved. I think any belief structure does require a certain amount of being able to rely upon the individuals. So if a person that I know who is normally inclined to speak the truth says something to me, and another person who I am not familiar with contradicts that, then I think it's natural to assume, right or wrong, that the person who I know and regard to be normally reliable is the person who I will follow or indeed take as being closer to the truth. The reason for this extremely circuitous preamble is simply to say that countries are run by organizations that believe they know the best way forward. They also believe that the majority do not know the best way forward. This is why we have representative democracy and not why we have true democracy. There are also other reasons why perhaps this is the case, whether we look into the inability of society of making such vast decisions quickly, efficiently, with the necessary expertise and knowledge required. There are any number of reasons. However, we have to come back to the fact that representative democracy means that we choose people to represent us, our interests, what is good for the society that we make up, that we constitute. There are rules in many cases. This is called a constitution. You will know this. Now, I come from the UK where we have an uncodified constitution. However, I'm currently living in a country which very much has a constitution, Germany. These constitutions are normally based on very sound humanitarian ideals. This is why a lot of politicians around the world talk about the glory of their constitution, and they proudly speak about the principles that these constitutions represent. And I'm not going to argue against those sentiments. I think it's quite clear to see in many cases that constitutions are powerful documents which are correctly observed in a bit of awe, shall we say, for what they require of politicians within society. This particular topic today, however, is called into question on the basis of the January 6th attack on the Capitol in Washington, because essentially groups of members of society tried to circumnavigate the rules. They were spurred on by people who had sworn to respect and uphold the Constitution. Looking at a timeline of the events on Wikipedia, on September 29th, Trump stated, "Proud Boys, stand back and stand by." Stand by. I think it's important to focus on those two words. November 3rd was election day. It took quite some time for the results to actually be conclusive. However, Biden clearly won. I'm pretty sure at some point Trump was adamant and convinced that there was no way he could have lost this election. If I'm to guess, and please bear in mind this is a pure guess, I would imagine Trump had been told the only way you will lose this election is if they cheat. And I think, judging by the ego that is Trump, this sat very comfortably on his shoulders. Let's not forget that within legal realms, I think almost just about, the Republican Party in many parts of the USA made it extremely difficult for certain members of society to vote. So they really steered the election towards their candidate. So I'm inclined to believe this was the basis for that statement. They made it so difficult for certain elements of society to vote Democrat, to participate in the democratic process, to find representation through that process, that they could not believe it would be possible for their candidate to lose. Because whether it's illegal or not, they fixed it. They tried to fix the result through these laws that they passed. And it wasn't enough. And so therefore, Trump, believing what he'd been told, came out with this line. He pursued that line, clearly. Lots of people support Trump. No Republican presidential candidate has ever received as many votes as Trump did last year in 2020. So there is clearly a lot of support for Trump. Anyway, on November 9th, Trump employs Christopher Miller as acting Secretary of Defense, and he plays quite an important role in the events that took place on the 6th of January. The CIA director, Gina Haspel, apparently tells the chair of the Joint Chiefs, Milley, that we are on the way to a right-wing coup. That's a very interesting statement to make. certain people thereafter make statements or send messages to others saying, I need you fighting fit by inauguration. A group called the Oath Keepers. Then, of course, the Proud Boys, the 3%ers are all present in Freedom Plaza on November 14th when 20 people are arrested. 2 police officers are injured. And then there's this huge banner which says Trump, Law and Order, which is laid atop Black Lives Matter Plaza, and then moved close to the White House, reading from Wikipedia. So, with these events taking place, it's quite clear that there are deliberate attempts to contradict. So, on the one hand, there is this effort to circumvent the Constitution. On the other hand, you've got these groups saying Trump is the Constitution, law and order. So that's what Trump stands for. Then they are using these messages to say that the actual problems within society are those that support Black Lives Matter. Now, this is very important because when you look at other attempts at a coup or other attempts at committing a large crime, you need to have a scapegoat, or to use a term which is more relevant in US politics, a patsy. Now, who plays the role of the patsy in this case? Well, they attempted to make the patsy people who believe in the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is why also on January the 6th, there were attempts made by right-wing media and right-wing groups to say the people attacking the Capitol are not Trump supporters, but they're actually Black Lives Matter supporters. Absolute rubbish. Of course, however, this was the attempt that they were making in trying to push forward this agenda. Moving forward. On December 19th, Trump declares, or he announces the January 6th rally, and he says it was statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election. Big protest in DC on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. Okay? Will be wild. At a rally in Arizona, Ali Alexander apparently seems to advocate violence against members of Congress, Republican members, who don't fight for Trump. Okay, so this seems to not necessarily be a direct threat. It's a reminder. It's a reminder to members of Congress, Republican members, you have to do your bit for your president. Even if it breaks with custom and precedent, you have to do your bit. And this is a reminder. It's a bit of a threat maybe, but it didn't necessarily suggest that there were plans in place to enact those threats. But obviously, history sort of turned out to be a bit different thereafter. There were a number of phone calls that took place. And I'm hopeful that the congressional investigation will look into those calls. They will make whatever judgment that they feel is necessary. What's important to identify at this point is that the National Park Service granted permit to rally to the March for Trump at the Ellipse and to Women for America First, with an attendance of about 5,000. Okay. Trump then tweets a confirmation of these rallies, and then retweets a supporter who said, "The cavalry is coming." And then Trump wrote back saying, "A great honor." Okay. 13 senators on the 2nd of January, including Ted Cruz, vowed to object to the election certification, which, if I recall correctly, has never really occurred. On the 3rd of January, Trump says that he will attend the Ellipse rally, and he orders Secretary of Defense Miller to do whatever was necessary to protect the demonstrators on January 6th. Do whatever is necessary. Okay. So, the National Park Service on January the 3rd issues a permit to rally to revival for January 5th rally in Freedom Plaza, stating there is no march associated with the event. Okay. There were individuals related to the Proud Boys who were arrested in the Washington area for certain public disorder offences, for being in possession of certain kinds of ammunition. Some people even had Molotov cocktails with them in their cars. Some of these people at least, were arrested. Who knows what could have happened had they not been. The DC National Guard Commander, Major General Walker, received orders from the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, saying that he would have to seek approval from McCarthy and Defense Secretary Miller before preparing a response to civil disturbance. So they previously had the authority to respond without seeking permission. This is quite important. So the National Guard of Washington, D.C. Was essentially hamstrung before the event by the authorities. So on Wednesday 6th, in the morning, 1:13, Stop the Steal organizer Alexander tweets, "First official day of the rebellion." A prominent member of the QAnon group, at loss of a better word, accused Mike Pence, at the time VP, of orchestrating a coup against Trump. A coup against Trump. At 8:17, Trump tweets allegations of vote fraud again. States want to correct their votes, which they now know were based on irregularities and fraud, plus corrupt process never received legislative approval. All Mike Pence has to do is send them back to the states, and we win. Do it, Mike. This is a time for extreme courage. This was 8:17 a.m. on the morning of January the 6th. This is all in line with this the method of building up a siege mentality. This is what is being done. So the people in the support of Trump are the ones who are being attacked from all sides, but also from people within their own party. And this is what they're trying to say. So, when you have this level of vitriol for the process, for the democratic process that brought Trump to power, it's very hard thereafter to turn back and claim any kind of authority within that same system. Trump sought for many years after his election to undermine the process, to undermine the authorities in Washington, to talk about the groups which he thought were responsible for weakening the USA. So he was essentially attacking liberal groups. He was essentially, obviously, attacking Democrats. He was attacking Democrat leaders. He was spreading conspiracy theories about members of the opposition. And these things he thought would see him through to victory or to re-election. It was not enough. At 9:45, the Federal Protective Service liaison officer informed the Capitol Police that they permitted 30,000 protesters at the Ellipse, and the Freedom Plaza permit was increased from 5,000 to 30,000 as well, and the protest outside the Sylvan Theatre was permitted for 15,000. So essentially they had legally allowed 75,000 protesters in and around the Capitol on that day. At 10:50 a.m., I'm skipping through some of these. I'm not going into the absolute detail, but I mean, this isn't exactly hard to come across online, so feel free to jump in and look at the more detailed form of this the chronology of events of the day. At 10:50 a.m., Rudy Giuliani calls for trial by combat. Yeah? At 12 o'clock, Trump begins his 1-hour speech, repeating allegations that the elections were stolen, being critical of Pence, who he names repeatedly, accusing fellow Republicans of not doing what was required of them to support him in his allegations. And he made this statement that he would walk with the crowd to the Capitol. Okay, even though straight after his speech, he runs back to the White House. Yeah, I'll leave that pause there actually, so you can decide. There's a briefing at the Federal Protective Service stating there are 300 Proud Boys at the Capitol. A man in a tree near the Ellipse is holding what looks like a rifle, and there are 25,000 people around the White House who are hiding bags in bushes. The email warns that the Proud Boys are threatening to shut down the downtown water system. Republican Paul Gosar tweets that Biden should concede and demands his concession by the next morning. Federal Protective Service officer writes in an email, protesters encouraging the protesters to march to Capitol grounds and continue protesting there. 12:49, Capitol Police respond to a report of a possible explosive device at the Republican National Committee headquarters, and apparently that is later identified as a pipe bomb. Then a second pipe bomb is found at the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee, and the buildings next to these HQs are evacuated. Police sweep of the area finds a vehicle containing a handgun, an M4 carbine assault rifle with a loaded magazine, and components for 11 Molotov cocktails and homemade napalm. At 12:53, rioters overwhelm police along the outer perimeter west of the Capitol building, pushing aside temporary fencing. Some protesters immediately follow, while others, at least initially, remain behind and admonish the others. Don't do it, you're breaking the law. So clearly there are different groups among Trump's supporters. So there are those who believe all of the stuff that he says, but who are unwilling themselves to break the law. However, there were many others who didn't have any qualms about doing what they did on the day. At 12:58, Chief Sund asks House Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving and Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Michael Stenger to declare an emergency and call for deployment of National Guard. Irving and Stenger state they will forward the request up the chains of command. Soon afterwards, congressional leaders arrive in Stenger's office and are outraged to learn that he has not yet called for any reinforcement. Phone records obtained at the Senate hearings reflect that Sun first reached out to Irving to request the National Guard at 12:58 p.m. on the day of the attack. Sun then called the Senate Sergeant Arms at the time, Michael Stenger, at 1:05 p.m., so 7 minutes had passed. Sun repeated his request in a call at 1:28, half an hour later, and then again at 1:34, 36 minutes later, 1:39, so 41 minutes later, and 1:45. At 1 p.m., Senators and VP Pence walk into the House chamber. This is where Pence releases a letter stating that the Constitution prevents him from unilaterally interfering with the Electoral College vote count. 10 minutes after that, Trump ends his speech by encouraging the crowd to march to the Capitol. We're going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country. Take back our country. The thing about a lot of these statements is that they can be interpreted in a number of ways. If you are a peaceful, law-abiding citizen, to take back our country means doing things in accordance to the law, in accordance to democratic custom, convincing people of the sense and meaning of your arguments, and using the democratic process as your tool. If, however, you are angry, violently inclined, believe that you have been cheated, believe that somebody has attempted to instigate a coup d'etat to remove your chosen leader, and that person says to you, go and make me proud, essentially, do what the others do not have the courage to do, that can be very easily interpreted as saying, take it back by force. So, again, interpretation in itself is a very problematic area. At 1:26, the US Capitol Police order evacuation of at least 2 buildings in the Capitol complex. At 1:30, Capitol Police are overwhelmed and forced to retreat up the steps of the Capitol. Large numbers of Trump supporters march from the ellipse down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the Capitol. At 1:34, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser requests via phone that Army Secretary McCarthy provide an unspecified number of additional forces. At 1:34. 1:35, in Senate deliberations, Senate Majority Leader McConnell warns that refusing to certify the results of the presidential election under false pretenses would push American democracy into a death spiral. 1:49, Capitol Police Chief Sund requests immediate assistance from District of Columbia National Guard Commander Major General William Walker, who then loads guardsmen onto buses in anticipation of receiving permission from the Secretary of the Army to deploy. At 1:50, DC Met Police on scene. Incident Commander Robert Glover declares a riot. 1 minute later, Trump supporter Alex Jones speaks from a bullhorn to the crowd on the west side, exhorting them to remain peaceful and to not fight the police. He directs them to the other side, where he claims they have a permit and a stage. Radio talk show host and former FEMA director Michael Brown tweets the baseless claim that the people breaching Capitol security are likely Antifa, Black Lives Matter protesters, or other insurgents disguised as Trump supporters. And he suggests the attack could be a psychological warfare operation. At 1:54, Todd Herman, guest hosting the Rush Limbaugh show, informs his large national radio audience of Brown's claim that the people breaching security are not Trump supporters. At 1:58, along the east side of the Capitol, smaller police presence retreats from a different mob, removing a barrier along the northeast corner of the building. At 2 p.m., the mob removes the last barrier protecting the east side of the Capitol. At 1:59, Chief Sund receives the first reports that rioters had reached the Capitol's doors and windows and were trying to break in. At 2:05, Kevin Greason is declared dead after suffering a heart attack outdoors on the Capitol grounds. At 2:10, the mob west of the Capitol chased police up steps, breaching the final barricade and approach an entrance directly below the Senate chamber. At the same time, House Sergeant at Arms Irving calls Chief Sund with formal approval to request assistance from the National Guard. 2:10. The original request from Sund came at 12:58. At 2:11, rioter Dominic Petzola breaks a window on the northwest side of the Capitol with a plastic shield. And a minute later, the first rioter enters the Capitol through the broken window, opening a door for others. VP Pence is removed from the Senate chamber to a nearby office. The Senate is gavelled into recess. Rioters chase a lone Capitol police officer up northwest stairs where there are doors to the Senate chamber in both directions, as police inside the chamber attempt to lock doors. If the mob had arrived a minute earlier, it would have been in sight of Vice President Pence as he was moved into an office about 100 feet from the landing. Officer Eugene Goodman leads the mob to back up in front of a set of Senate doors while senators inside attempt to evacuate. That is one brave officer. Thereafter, there are any number of declarations that are made. Trump tweets at 2:24, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. History will look back to judge the events of January the 6th. There are many, many other details. However, I only wanted to give some of the information with regards to what happened in the preceding hours, because this is what naturally led to the event of the attack. What happened during the attack, what happened after the attack, this then moves to a criminal investigation. And so thereafter, it's not really possible to connect other people with those individual crimes unless there is proof to say, go into this person's office and do this or destroy that and so on. But then we're moving into the realm of fiction, and I don't want to do that. There's just no reason for it. So the earlier part of the day is what interested this particular episode, this particular podcast, and that's what we have alluded to. The principles that we referred to earlier in our podcast when we were speaking, Karin and I, these are the important bastions of any society where you wish to have respect, you wish to have representation, you wish to have participation, you wish to have the rule of law, you wish to have an understanding and respect for human rights, and you wish to have equality. And that equality has to be extended to all areas of society. If you're only going to have one group, no matter how large or small, protected above others, then you don't have equality. Then you don't have a rule of law. Then you don't have representation. This is very important to understand. And unfortunately, it would appear that some politicians are trying to make a career out of teaching members of society that this is not the case. So I would implore people should read a little bit more about democratic theory if they haven't already done so, and those that have done so should read or consult their conscience too, because you know what is best too. And Mike. Two and